two. Check. Check, 1, 2. Okay, well now I think it's on. All right. All right. So this is the one I was going to tell at the start of today's service. So the office manager called the two employees in and said, you know, you told me when I hired you that you were cannibals, and you even put it on your resume, and we were clear about it, but now one of the janitors has disappeared, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you go. And as they were leaving the office, one of them turned to the other and said, "You idiot, we have been feasting on middle management for months, and you had to go eat someone they would actually miss." All right, so today we're going to start a series, and we're going to be learning about some of the beliefs, customs, practices, dances, religions of some Native Americans in the Great Plains in the mid-1800s. And we're going to do this by looking specifically at the life of a medicine person who is known as Black Elk. Now, Black Elk is a translation of this name that I cannot pronounce. Something interesting about Black Elk in particular, he was born in 1863. He lived until 1950. So he lived almost 90 years, and he was an eyewitness to some great changes in the life of the natives of the plains. In his early life, he lived in a portable teepee village he was born during the Civil War, and let's remember here that during the Civil War, the United States, as we think of it, was only about a third. It was only about the eastern third of what we think of as the United States today. During the Civil War, the Midwest still belonged to the Native Americans, and that was actually part of what was being fought over in the 1860s, was if there was going to be expansion westward, what were going to be the laws of these new states that would be created. So Black Elk was born in the middle of the Civil War, before that started, and then he lived the last decades of his life on a reservation, so he also has a perspective on that. Black Elk is not, Black Elk Speaks might be the most famous book by or about a Native American. It's not necessarily because Black Elk himself is the most exciting or heroic character in Native American history, but he was an eyewitness to some of these pivotal moments, and he personally knew Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. He witnessed the aftermath of the Battle of Little Bighorn, participated in the Ghost Dance, and saw the massacre at Wounded Knee. Besides that, he was a medicine person, and that means not only the local tribal doctor, but also a person who was in charge of leading religious rituals and memorizing the sacred stories and kind of being one of the holders of the sacred knowledge in the village. Now, we might have kind of an idea that a Native American village would have one medicine person. They would generally have several, because a medicine person could unexpectedly die, or something could happen to them. So you didn't want just one medicine person holding all of that knowledge. So he was a medicine person. He wasn't the only medicine person, but this makes him a special, really good source of information. The book Black Elk Speaks was assembled by the poet John Neihardt, who in the 1920s was a celebrity poet. In 1930, he was the poet laureate of the United States. He was very popular. He is not very well remembered today. But in 1930, John Neihardt decided that he was going to write one long poem about the westward expansion of the United States. And the poem was going to be so long that this one poem was going to be in 5 volumes. It was going to be 5 whole books together telling this one giant poem. And for the 4th book of the poem, he wanted to show the Native American ghost dance. He felt that that was an important part of the westward, adventure of the United States. And so in order to write this poem, he decided that he was going to interview a real live Native American, try to find somebody who had participated in the ghost dance. He went to a reservation. Someone put him in touch with this medicine person, Black Elk. And so John Neihardt interviewed Black Elk, actually for several days. And what we're seeing here in this picture, here's the poet John Neihardt. Here's Black Elk speaking. This is Black Elk's adult son who is translating between the two of them. And John Neihart's daughter is writing a transcript of these interviews. And when the interviews were done, Neihardt did write this long, long poem about the Native Americans of the Midwest. It became part of his big book. And sometime later, he realized that there in his journals, in these interviews, he had this other book that he had got in these interviews, the full life story of this Native American medicine person. And that was how Neihardt came to assemble the book that we know as Black Elk Speaks. The book Black Elk Speaks is not by Black Elk, it's by this poet. But he assembled this life story. The book Black Elk Speaks came out in about 1930, and it disappeared. It was not a hit. It kind of totally vanished for 30 years. And then in the 1960s, when the hippies had their big interest in the religions of India and also the spiritualities of Native Americans, somebody found a copy of Black Elk Speaks in the dusty basement of some, bookstore, and suddenly this book became kind of a hit. This was in the 1960s. This was 10 years after Black Elk had passed away. So he never found out that this book, that he had, this book about his life was going to become this hit. And Black Elk Speaks then became one of the 2 most famous books about Native Americans, this and Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. One of the things I think that's really fascinating about this book is that it gives us some glimpses just into the texture of Lakota life. For example, the first thing that the narrator, the first thing that Black Elk has to do in this book is tell us when he was born, when his story begins. But he's going to do it, he's not going to do it using numbered years, and he's not going to do it using a numbered month, because that is not how his people remembered and recorded time. So, this is how he does it, and I've added in brackets December and these years. But he says, I was born in the moon of popping trees. And what he's saying is, he was born in the month when the trees make kind of a crackling sound and the leaves are gone. So we can identify that as December. The Native American way of naming a moon or month is with a picture. Like a Native American name for a person is generally going to be a sort of a flash, a moving picture, like this animal doing this thing. Or in this case, the trees are doing this thing. They're making this particular sound. And what it does is, when you say the name of the month, it just gives the person this evocative flash of, yes, I know how it feels when the trees are doing that thing. We use, for this month that we're in right now, we use the word December. What does December mean? December, it's this 3-syllable word, but it does come from a language. It means something. What? It means 10. It means 10 moon. Although December, September means 7 moon, October means 8 moon, November means 9 moon, and December means 10 moon. And yet, these are not the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months anymore, because a couple of thousand years ago, somebody shoved July and August into the middle of the calendar. But we continue to use these names, these Latin names, even though they don't really have a meaning for us. They're just these kind of meaningless syllables strung together. So I think there's something interesting about this indigenous American tradition of naming the month after a picture or after some vivid flash. Next, he has to tell us what year he was born. He says, I was born on the Little Powder River in the winter when the 4 crows were killed. And here he's referring not to birds, but to members of the Crow tribe. So he's saying, if you remember the winter when there was this specific raid and we killed 4 members of this other tribe. That's the year that I was born. I was 3 years old when my father's right leg was broken in the Battle of the 100 Slain. And from that wound, he limped until the day he died, which was about the same time when Bigfoot's band was butchered on Wounded Knees. That's 1890. By Bigfoot, he's not referring to the mythical Sasquatch. He means actually a Native American tribal leader whose name meant Bigfoot. All right, so he tells time in this way. We use these numbers, and for us to say that it is 2024, does anybody know? It's been 2024 years since what? Supposedly since the birth of Jesus, although there was no birth certificate for Jesus. Nobody wrote it down. And it was 1,000 years after Jesus that some monk was charged the assignment of figuring out what year Jesus was born. And the way that he did it was to say, in the gospel according to Matthew, Jesus was born just before the death of Herod the Great. Jesus is born, Herod wants to kill him, the Holy Family goes to Egypt, Herod dies, they come back. So this monk said, well, if we're going to settle the year 0 as the year Jesus was born, it must have been the year that Herod the Great died. Now we know there was a slight miscalculation. Herod the Great died in the year 4 BC. So even to say that we calculate time by the birth of Jesus is kind of haphazard. Yes? And there is no 0. Right. So that's right. So we calculate time in this silly way. Now that's in the Christian world. In Judaism, it's the year 5070 something. In Islam, it's the year 1400 something. Every different religion has its own way of deciding what year it is. Here in the United States, you can believe it's whatever year you want, but when it comes time to do your tax return, then we're all Christian. Then we all say, like, it's the year 2024. All right. So, Black Elk, he's narrating, he's saying, you can tell how old I am by how long my father limped after his leg got wounded. And then he says, when I was older, I learned why it was that my father limped. I learned what that fighting was about. The Washishu, now his word for the quote, the white man or the European invader, the Midwestern Native American name for that is the Washishu. It means the fat taker, and that means that, whatever is good, and fat taker is not, it translates all right, but it means the taker of what is abundant and productive. It's not talking about fat as something that we're trying to lose. It's talking about fat as something that we need and that the earth needs in order to survive. So he says that when he was 3 years old, the fat takers had found some of the yellow metal that they worship and that makes them crazy. And they wanted to have a road through our country to the place where the yellow metal was. But my people did not want the road. It would scare the bison and make them go away. It would let other Washishu come in like a river. They told us that they only wanted to use a little land, as much as a wagon would take between the wheels. But our people knew better, and when you look around you now, you can see what it was that they wanted. Black Elk is confused by gold. Apparently, he says that his people have known about it, but that they've never gone looking for it. He said, our people knew there was yellow metal in little chunks up there, but they did not bother with it because it was not good for anything. Black Elk grew up in a mobile culture, a culture that was constantly on the move, and so you didn't collect metal things. That just kind of was more weight that you had to go around with. Gold is valuable to us, but we don't use it for forks and spoons and shovels. It's a soft, malleable metal. The value of gold is determined really by how many people don't have it. What makes gold valuable is not that everybody's got it. What makes gold valuable is that some people have it and some people don't. What determines its value is the way that it divides people into those who have and those who don't have. And that would be antithetical to this tribal view of life in which everybody should have what they need and nobody should have more than they need. So he says gold is not, it doesn't really do any good for us. He says the yellow metal is what, the Washishu worship, and it makes them crazy. But to a Native American, that's just some bizarre idiosyncrasy. I was 4 years old when word came from the Washishu that there would be peace and they would not use the road anymore. They made a treaty with Red Cloud that said our country would be ours as long as the grasses grow, and the waters flow. You can see that it is not the grass and the water that have forgotten. Once we were happy in our own country, and we were seldom hungry, for then the two-leggeds and the four-leggeds lived together like relatives, and there was plenty for them and for us. But the Washishu came, and they have made little islands for us and the other little islands for the four-leggeds. And always these islands are becoming smaller, for around them surges the gnawing flood of the Washishu, and it is dirty with lies and greed. Black Elk in his lifetime witnessed the beginning of the reservation on the Midwest, reservations for Native Americans, and he refers to the reservation as an island that is left by a flood. When I hear about the reservation, I asked my son Malcolm a couple of years ago, because he was learning about Native Americans. I said, what are you learning? What is a reservation? And he said, a reservation is a piece of land that the government gave to the Native Americans. And I thought, well, that certainly does make the U.S. government sound very friendly if it's giving land away. But really, no, it is when all of the land has been taken, and then the government says, well, here's this piece of land that nobody wants, and therefore that is what we'll give to the Native Americans. So Black Elk is going to witness this transition to the reservation. Now he says that the animals have also been placed on reservations. Do we have reservations for the animals? Is there like a reservation for bears? Is there a reservation for deer? What do we call that? The national state parks. Yeah, those are reservations because that's where it's legal. Yes.
Until recently, Niagara Falls State Park was known as Niagara Reservation.
Yeah. Yeah, those are reservations where it is still legal to be a bear. It is not legal to be a bear in the city of Niagara Falls. Anyone who is caught being a grizzly bear on the streets of Niagara Falls is going to be, incarcerated if they're lucky, tranquilized, and then they will wake up back on the reservation, which always makes me wonder, like, how do bears know? I mean, how would these animals possibly know when they're crossing the line from where it's legal to be an animal to where it's not legal? But yeah, and they can probably see, like, this does seem to be the end of the forest here. But so he brings this up, that not only is it the Native Americans who've been placed on these reservations, but it's also the animals. They're stuck on reservations too. Black Elk remembers, I was not allowed to play very far from our teepee, and my mother would say, if you are not good, the Washishu will get you. And this, in his childhood, this was like the boogeyman, or the zombie or whatever, was that his mom would say, if you're a bad boy, the white people will come and they will abduct you and they will take you away. And this actually, I've encountered this in other places too. This was a pretty common Native American belief. And remember, this is back in the 1860s. So this is still decades before the disastrous experiments of the Indian schools, where there actually were people who would go and kidnap children from reservations and then put them into these kind of prison camps. But Black Elk here, he's worried in more of a zombie way. A Lakota holy man, he said, dreamed that the were going back into the earth and that a strange race had woven a spider's web all around the Lakota. And he said, when this happens, you will live in square gray houses in a barren land, and beside those square gray houses, you will starve. They say that the man who had this vision went back to Mother Earth soon after he saw this vision, and it was sorrow that killed him. One of the recurring images, one of the recurring metaphors of the European invader is the spider, that which kind of builds this trap, that which builds a spider web. And one of the fears was that this kind of spider-like, this swarm of spider-like creatures were going to keep weaving this web and making this trap until everybody was stuck in it. Now, this medicine man, the scariest thing that he can think of is being forced to live in a square house, which every house that I've ever lived in has been a square. It's always been a square, or some combination of rectangles. If you're pretty fortunate, you can live in a rectangle with a triangle on top, and that's a pretty big deal. Square houses. I've always lived in square houses on a grid. I guess a couple of times I lived in a trailer. But I've lived most of my life in square houses on grids. Why? What is it that makes rectangular houses make more sense to us than cone houses? Well, a rectangular, what?
Easier to build.
Okay, good. It's easy to build.
Permanent.
It's permanent, yeah. And right. I mean, except that the houses are all kind of crumbling now. But we tend to build rectangular houses because it's the way that you can maximize the indoor space. And we tend to arrange houses in grids because that is the easiest way to find the one person you're looking for in a city full of strangers, is for everybody to agree there is this grid, but if you can find this street between this street and this street, and then you find the number, there's the one person you know. And you don't want to go knock on somebody else's door because you don't know them. So we've got this system that makes sense to us, which is the way to pack in the most people. As a matter of fact, with rectangle houses, you can even stack the rectangles on top of each other, which you cannot do with a cone house. And the grid is a way to, sort of know, be able to find yourself when you're lost in a place full of strangers. Now, to this Native American medicine person, that living in a square house in a grid in a city full of strangers was just horrifying. They say it was so horrifying that he had this nightmare of it, and the nightmare killed him. He would have been more familiar with cone houses in a circle. Black Elk says, birds make their nests in circles, for theirs is the same religion as ours. Our teepees were round like the nests of birds, and these were always set in a circle, the nation's hoop, a nest of many nests where the Great Spirit meant for us to hatch our children. Black Elk uses this other image, an image of being like birds. And when he was growing up, his people, part of what made their life way viable was that, like birds, they could migrate, they could move with the seasons. They could go to where the food was, or they could go to where the warmth was. And wherever they went, they would set their teepees up in a circle, which was a way of showing that everybody here knows everybody else, and that everybody here is connected. So I have never lived in a cone house in a circle. I've never even really thought about it. But to him, this is what makes the most sense. And even if it looks kind of strange to us, to him, this is his idea of a natural way for humans to live in the Midwest. Now, here in Western New York, people did not live in cone houses in circles. People lived in long houses, and a long house, as you know, was kind of more like if an apartment building was built sideways. And that was a way to pack in sort of a large number of people just to keep people warm in the winter. But for him, instead of building one big house to be warm in the winter, you would build your tent, and then when the winter came, you would just roll up the tents and move them southward. Black Elk describes his education. At the age of 9, I was growing taller and was riding horses now and could shoot prairie chickens and rabbits with my bow. Black Elk is being prepared from very early in his childhood. He'll receive his first bow when he's 5 years old, and he'll start practicing shooting birds. And then by the time he's 9, he's already learning how to shoot something the size of a rabbit from a moving horse. This is going to be important for the bison hunt, because when you're in the bison hunt, and we'll see, he'll give a detailed account of that, and I talked about it last time also, but when you're in the bison hunt, you're not aiming for something that's the size of a bison. You're actually just aiming for the one front shoulder so that you can hit it and just take the animal down so that it won't run another 30 miles before it dies. So his education was horseback riding and archery. He said, the boys of my people began very young to learn the ways of men, and no one taught us. We just learned by doing what we saw. He's talking about boys. The same was true for girls. Children, the education was following adults around and imitating them. And, if you've ever, been around small children before, that's what children like to do. They like to follow grown-ups around and imitate them. And We kind of do this other thing. Our idea of education is more of an industrial, it's more of a factory, assembly line model. As a matter of fact, our public education in the United States is only about a century old. It was only about 100 years ago that it was decided that the children had to be removed from the factories because the children were taking all of the assembly line jobs. And so the adults couldn't get a job because the children would work cheaper. And so this deal was struck that it would become illegal for children to work on assembly lines so that the adults could work on the assembly lines, but that meant that the children needed childcare. And so we kind of developed this whole educational system out of it. And I don't know about your education. My education was very much an industrial assembly line education. I showed up in kindergarten, a teacher filled me up with kindergarten stuff and then stamped me with approval, and then I rolled on to the first grade, and they put in the first grade stuff and they stamped me with approval and then rolled me on to the second grade. So my educational experience was an industrial one. And I guess it kind of prepared me for industry. It sort of prepared me to be a cog in a machine. It did not teach me how to, like, hunt a, quail, or how to, build a tent or anything like that. Now, we choose this, this factory assembly line model because, it theoretically, we can say that every child has the chance to learn everything, although we know that most of them don't, and that children don't really learn in an industrial assembly line way. But Black Elk's education was following grown-ups around, watching them hunt, and then learning how to hunt, and doing things that, were kind of interesting and entertaining. Our education system is built for something entirely different. It's not there to make us self-sufficient in the woods. It's there to prepare us to be, like, good cogs in a citizen machine. There is a comical letter that was written by an Iroquois author in 1744 when the College of William and Mary in Virginia got the idea that they would invite the Iroquois to send 12 young men, and that the College of William and Mary would give them a full scholarship, including room and board, to just come and learn so that they could become socially, mobile. They received the following reply. Sirs, we know that you highly esteem the kind of learning taught in your colleges. We understand that you mean to do us good by your proposal, and we thank you heartily. But our ideas of this kind of education happen not to be the same as yours. We have had some experience of it. Several of our young people were formerly brought up in the colleges of the northern provinces. They were instructed in all of your sciences, but when they came back to us, they were bad runners, ignorant of every means of living in the woods, unable to take a deer or to kill an enemy, spoke our language imperfectly. They were neither fit for hunters, warriors, nor counselors. They were totally good for nothing. We are, however, not the less obliged by your kind offer, though we decline accepting it, and to show our grateful sense of it, if the gentlemen of Virginia will send us a dozen of their sons, we will take care of their education, instruct them in all we know, and we will make men of them. Well, you can see, this is an entirely different set of priorities. I went to a pretty good college. I did not learn how to hunt a deer or to build a tent or to kill an enemy in battle. Part of Black Elk's education was through sports and games. Now, we don't necessarily think of sports and games as educational. But he says, When it was summer, all the boys from 5 or 6 years up were playing war. The little boys would gather together from different bands of the tribe and fight each other with mud balls that they threw with willow sticks. So this is something that children kind of naturally do. My parents, for example, back in like the 1980s, decided that they were going to raise their children kind of, in a gender-free, genderless, way. And my mom said it worked just fine when they had a little girl and she played with dolls, my older sister, but that as soon as the boys were born, they would give us dolls and we would just hit each other with them. And they realized that apparently there really is something about this. Now, my parents did not think of that as educational, but for Black Elk, that is part of his education because part of his life is going to be raiding and warfare. And the big boys played the game called throwing them off their horses, which is a battle all but the killing. Those who fell upon the ground were counted as dead. When I was older, I also often played this game. We were always naked when we played it, just as warriors are when they go into battle, if it is not too cold, because they are swifter without clothes. So this would have been the Lakota version of like playing football, except that instead of touch football, you're actually just riding into the middle of a circle, trying to knock people off of their horses, learning how to fall down and get back on without getting trampled. Other games, he said, included raiding the village to steal buffalo meat after the hunt, and he names this game, putting dry sunflower seeds on our wrists, and then we would light these on fire at the top, and you had to let it burn clear down to the skin, and the object was not to cry out as it burned. So Black Elk is talking about in his boyhood in the 1860s, one of the children's favorite games was inflicting pain on each other's hand to see who could take the most pain without making a noise. I don't know about you all, but in my childhood in the 1980s, people were still playing this kind of game. And people would play bloody knuckles, where they would just hit each other with their hands and try to draw blood from it. Or sometimes somebody would come up and just grab your wrist and pull it, and twist it in two different directions, and they call that an Indian burn. Black Elk is saying that one of the things, and this, interestingly, he refers to this as part of his education, because part of his way of life is that he's going to have to be a tough person who can take a lot of pain and not make noise about it. All right, good. So in our next session, which will be in, I think, in like 3 weeks, we will continue with some more details of life growing up in a Native American village in the 1860s. Thank you. And also, I brought with me, if you haven't gotten a copy of my book, Natives Discover America, an anthropological study of the white man, which is a book that I wrote of kind of assembling my favorite quotes and observations where Native Americans are trying to figure out who is the white man and what does he think and what makes him tick and how does he, how and why does he do the things he does. So he does. So I think this is a fun book. So thank you very much, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.